This section is about getting the reference or searching the elements using the getElementById, by tags, by class or by name method. This topic is of DOM and web category, and there will be 3 relative questions of this topic. We have already discussed that what is DOM and how the nodes are placed inside the DOM. Now, when do you think that you have to search or get the reference of a specific element? Let's take an example. We have this H1 here, which is showing content when page loaded message. And there is a button. Now, let's say I want that when I click on the button, I want to change the content of this H1. That means you need to get the handle of this H1. To get the handle of this particular element, we have to give an ID and then we can get the reference. Let's try this example. I have the code ready here. First thing is that I'm going to give some identification to this H1. Let's say I give maybe content CNT. Now when the button is clicked, I've already configured a function called btnClicked. So on click, I want to call this function called btnClicked. Now when you want to change the content of this H1, it means you need to get the reference of it, then only you can change it. So let's take an example here. There is an object called document which we have discussed in few of our previous sections. The document object has a method called getElementById. So this says that it is going to get the element by ID. So the H1's ID is right now CNT. So I'm going to say CNT. Now H1 is an element which has a content. So there is a property called inner HTML which we can use. Let's say I want to change the content, that is content after button clicked. Let's go back to the browser. I'll just refresh. And now when I click on this, as you can see that the content is changed. So the getElementById is one of the method which you can use to get a specific element only. Remember that. In fact, the same code can be written in one more way. Let's try that also. What I can do is I can create a variable saying CNT. For example, this is a kind of element. So I will say a CNT element, right? That equals to, I'm going to just shift this thing and keep it on the separate line. Now this CNT element has reference of this entire element. It means that now I can say that CNT element dot inner HTML equals to the value. Let's try this now. See, the output is still the same. In the previous way, we tried this statement, that is document.getElementById directly, whereas here now we are using the object. This object can further be used to represent this entire element. You must remember that whenever this document.getElementById method is used, it is used to get the reference directly. So the getElementById is something which gets a reference of a particular element. There are also other methods which can be used to get references. Let me change this code and then we will discuss. Now this page has a division, 3 paragraphs, 2 H3s and a button as well. Let's first of all check the output. So here is the output. We have the paragraphs and the H3s here. Now let's try few more methods to get reference. Now on a click of a button, I am saying const elements is equal to document.getElementsByTagName. Remember here elements is plural. So there are multiple values can be returned. Let's say I will write P here. That means the tag paragraph, whichever paragraph it finds in this document that we want inside this elements. So naturally, because there are multiple values, it's going to return an array, and that array we are going to display. So I'll say console log elements. I'll just refresh the page and clicking the button. So here you see that we have 3 paragraph references returned. So in case if you want to refer, let's say the first paragraph, you can say elements of 0, which will refer this element. So this is the kind of method which searches the elements by the tag name. Similarly, we have a method which searches by class name as well, right? So instead of by tag name, if I just say class name here, right? But then we need to give the CSS classes. So let's try with h3. I'm going to say class is equal to maybe A. And the same I will apply for, let's say, the other paragraph also. Here I'm going to say class is equal to A. So all the elements which have the class name A, those classes will be returned into elements. Let's try this also. And just click on this. So now you see that we have p.a and h3.a. So now we have reference of a paragraph and h3. Like class name, we do also have only name, that is elements by name. So in case if you have given the name property, let's say here the name attribute, let's say the name attribute, I'll say name is equal to para, that is paragraph, and this also I give name is equal to para. Most of the time you will see that the same name creates a group. I'll just shift this here. The same name you see with radio buttons more often, right? But here also we can try this. Now instead of A, I'm going to say para here. So whichever element has the name para will be returned as the output. So there are two paragraphs which are having the same name. So now we have seen that we have getElementById, getElementsByTagName, getElementsByClassName, and getElementsByName method to find the element references. GetElementById is a kind of method which can only work with the document object. You cannot say element dot and then getElementById. Let's try this division here. I'll say division is equal to id, for example, test. So this is a test division. Instead of document, you can have reference of that division only. Say for example, I'll get const test division is equal to document dot get element by id, and you give the test here. So now the tdiv is the reference of this entire division. Now what you can do, you can say, for example, let's say I change this method. I'll say getElementsByTagName. Let's do that. And I want to search for all the paragraphs. Now if you write this, it means it is going to search for all the paragraphs in a document. Assume that you have one more division here, which again has one more paragraph, right? This is a next division paragraph, for example. Let's try this first of all. I'll just save this and refresh. Now how many paragraphs you have? You have the 3 paragraphs of the first division, right? And the 4th paragraph of the next division. We have 4 elements returned by this method. Now instead of document, I'll just say tdiv. Tdiv, which represents the first division. So in this case, what will happen? If I refresh and click on this, now it represents only 3 paragraphs. The reason is we have applied the method on element. So you can always have element dot, that means in this case tdiv, but the element, whichever element you have, that dot the getElementsByTagName, by class name, or even by name method, though by name doesn't make much sense. But getElementById is a kind of method which is always applied with document. So you are always going to write like this, document dot getElementById. If you write element dot getElementById, it is invalid. So these are few getElementBy, that is tag, class, or even id and name. These methods help you to get references of the elements from a document. The reason behind getting a reference is because, like we tried to change the content of h1. So from JavaScript, when you are trying to change something inside the JavaScript section, you need to have reference of those HTML elements. And that's where these methods are useful. Now let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question is, can you use document.getElementById and element.getElementById? The getElementById with document is possible, but with element it's not possible, because the searching of element by ID is always for the entire document and not for a specific region. The second question is, what does the getElementsByTagName return? The getElementsByTagName returns the array of elements. Like this, we tried the example and it returned all the paragraphs of the document. The third question is, what is the difference between getElementsByClassName and getElementsByName? So the class name and name are different methods. The class name refers the class of an element, whereas the elements by name refers the name which is given to the element. Remember, never get confused with ID and name, because name can be a duplicate value, but in case of ID, you should never keep a duplicate ID.